Hello, YouTube! This is Jensaarai, the Nerd-Rage Ranter, and here is my latest Versus video. This will be another of my shorter videos, as both of these combatants are so damn similar that really going into detail would just turn this into a hair splitter. So without further delay, I present for your approval and in answer to your requests, Darth Malgus versus Darth Vader. You all know who they are. Complete and utter badasses on every conceivable level, so let's just skip the bios. At the time of his defeat and apparent death, Darth Malgus was a 60-year-old human male. At the time of his defeat and confirmed death, Darth Vader was a 45-year-old human male. Despite his age and extensive physical degradation brought on by his deep, lifelong immersion in the dark side of the Force, Malgus's physical capabilities didn't appear to have been overly affected. However, I credit his extensive cybernetics, the result of severe injuries sustained during the Battle of Alderaan, for his enduring physical ability. His strength and agility were prodigious, and his stamina and endurance were utterly insane. As detailed in the short story, The Third Lesson, immediately after being buried alive beneath tons of rock, and before he received any treatment, he capably engaged a pair of Jedi during the Sith retreat and bested them, despite being a physical wreck who would require substantial cybernetic augmentation just to survive. Even more impressive was the fact that he didn't drop dead from the exertion immediately afterwards. The big thing to consider here is how Malgus's cybernetics were almost entirely a boon, while Vader's saddled him with limitations. While his strength was boosted to superhuman levels, his agility was extremely hampered, which forced him to completely retool his fighting technique to compensate. That being said, Darth Vader was no immovable rock, and while he wasn't one to dance around on the balls of his feet, he could cover distance very quickly with solid power leaps, and had no trouble pivoting on the spot. His balance was excellent, he just wasn't very nimble. Beyond his issues with agility, most of Vader's problems with his cybernetics had to do with the intense discomfort and the complete lack of ergonomics. And as we saw in the novel, Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, he compensated for many of these flaws fairly quickly and learned to live with his situation. However, Malgus does get a decided physical edge, as he boasted all of the same improvements to strength and physical endurance that Vader did, but without the cost to his agility. However, the relevance of this edge is questionable, as Malgus gets it solely because of his agility, and Vader has successfully defended himself against more agile opponents on several occasions. Both were dedicated power duelists with decades of combat experience. While Malgus's fighting form hasn't been confirmed in any source, we can make an educated guess. His clear preference for brute force tactics and power moves strongly suggests Form 5 lightsaber combat, a highly aggressive, strength-oriented fighting style based around following up defensive blocks and parries with immediate offensive counters, and one of the fighting forms that Sith warriors of Malgus's era were known to specialize in, alongside Shicho, Surisu, and Juya, as detailed in the Tor Encyclopedia. Darth Vader's fighting form, on the other hand, has not only been confirmed, but heavily examined and detailed. He was primarily known as a Form 5 specialist, but was in fact a highly sophisticated hybrid lightsaber master, including elements of all lightsaber forms in a personalized technique built on the back of the Jensaarai. Vader was easily capable of matching Malgus's brute force, and exceeded him in terms of precision and technical sophistication. That isn't to say that Malgus was lacking in such skills, but Malgus's fighting style was largely based around his ability to channel his rage to boost his physical capabilities, rather than skill as a swordmaster. However, while I do give Vader the edge as a martial artist, it is a very slight one. Malgus still has decades of combat experience and more experience fighting Jedi, so he definitely had the skill to compete with someone like Vader. But I think the marriage between Vader's physical capabilities and his much more refined technique made for a more effective package than Malgus's pure brute force. Vader's force abilities were known to have been affected by his cybernetic reconstruction due to the loss of so much of his living tissue, and it stands to reason that Malgus would have suffered similar effects. However, both still soldiered on, and were known as extremely skilled and powerful Darksiders. They were both masters in the use of force-based physical augmentation, allowing them to move and strike with superhuman speed, strength, and agility. Even Vader, with his hampered mobility, was capable of moving faster than the human eye could perceive when pressed. Both were also experts in the combative use of telekinesis, though I would say that Vader gets the edge here. While Malgus had used aggressive force pushes and grips to lash out at opponents or break their bodies, sometimes chaining in telekinetic manipulations of his lightsaber for devastating effect, his methods have been extremely straightforward. Vader had not only matched all of Malgus's applications and skills, but had applied much more controlled and directed assaults, thrashing his opponents with anything not bolted down in terrifying displays of power, sometimes while simultaneously attacking them with his lightsaber. What does Malgus have against that? On the flip side, Malgus is capable of Force Lightning, the one force ability that Vader is incapable of using or effectively defending against. That being said, Vader had developed a number of countermeasures against Force Lightning. The most notable involved using his lightsaber to absorb and redirect high-intensity blasts, a method he demonstrated against the Starkiller clone when they fought on Kamino, as depicted in The Force Unleashed 2. He also outfitted his armor with electrical insulation to lessen the effects of Force Lightning, though this was only effective to a point. However, this does mean that Malgus's lightning is not the trump card you all think it is, and at the end of the day, I say that Darth Vader gets the edge as a Force wielder, as he matches or outclasses Malgus in every other way. All of Vader's advantages outweigh Malgus's one. Both individuals very much blur the line between equipment and implants, though I will do my best. Both wear heavy armor and breathing apparatuses. As detailed in the Tor Encyclopedia, Malgus's mask maximizes his oxygen intake during battle, which would improve his stamina and physical capabilities, allowing him to drive himself further and harder. It's easy to imagine that Vader's respirator provides similar benefits. As Vader's kit features a full face helmet, I think his body is more effectively protected than Malgus's, whose head is left exposed. Don't forget that because all of Vader's limbs are prosthetics, he doesn't require the heavy plated gauntlets that Malgus wears, so although Malgus's armor features more visible plating, Vader's armor more effectively protects the parts of his body that actually matter. In addition, Vader's dual-phase lightsaber provides him with more options in combat, making it the superior weapon. The sharpened razor blades flanking the emitter on Malgus's weapon are of little use, due to Vader's armor and prosthetic limbs. Now to examine that all-important factor, tactical ingenuity and mindset. As we saw in the novel Tor Deceived, Malgus was a very intelligent and calculating duelist, despite his driving rage. However, much of his intellect was devoted to anticipating the actions of his opponents so he could respond accordingly. It was a very focused mindset, and the result was this sort of tactical tunnel vision. He was so focused on the opponent that he repeatedly failed to exploit opportunities presented by the environment around him, and has even been caught off guard when adversaries applied such tactics. Vader, on the other hand, had learned the lessons of his defeat on Mustafar. No longer does he throw himself blindly at adversaries, thinking of nothing more than killing them. A tactical genius, Vader understands when to cut loose and plow through his opponents, and when to hold back and settle in for the long haul. Vader has learned from the examples of both of his masters, understanding that a fight is never a goal in itself. Sometimes it is simply a distraction from the true goal, and best countered with a larger distraction. Vader was especially talented at the larger distraction end of things, and many of his most successful battles have been deep and far-reaching psychological manipulations. Terror is a weapon that Vader wields with practiced ease, and his accomplishments mark him as a master of the Sith Dun Mosh technique. While I think we can all agree that Vader wouldn't be able to intimidate Malgus, his broader tactical and strategic mindset means that he would likely find some way to outwit him, due to Malgus's tactical tunnel vision. So at the end of the day, I think Darth Vader is the most likely victor out of these two. However, I will acknowledge that his victory is by no means a sure thing, as most of his advantages are still only by slight margins. But, in the end, I declare Darth Vader the winner. Remember, ladies, gentlemen, and pan-dimensional beings, this is just my opinion, so don't get too bent out of shape just because Darth Malgus is your favorite Sith. Feel free to chime in, short comments below, essays sent to my message board, or emailed to me. But above all, keep things civil!